Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summit.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Bernie Taylor, guest on the Break It Down show. I'm the author of Before Orion, Find the Face of the Hero. Listen in today.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
This is a friend of Brian Keating, Dr. Brian Keating, who's given us a bunch of guests. And actually, we're going to have Brian on shortly. So this show may come out actually after we do Brian's because we're going to load something up for a specific date for him. But thanks to Brian and the shout out to him for his great work and for introducing us to Bernie, who's, I guess, the best thing to call you is a thought leader and a storyteller because you're part anthropologist, you're part, you know what? Well, I'm going to shut up and have you explain what the heck it is that you do because, god dang.
Actually, that's a good question. Well, I see myself as a naturalist. And in the naturalist that maybe like Sitting Bull was or Chief Joseph. Native Americans were animists. They believed that there was life in the world around them and in the cosmos. And that there was an order and rhythms to how the salmon ran and how the deer and the elk rutted. And so I see myself as a naturalist, somebody who's in tune with the natural world. And famous naturalists are Jane Goodall. Before she worked on the chimps, she was working with her dog. And when she went to work with the chimps, she actually had no educational background. She didn't have any college education until many years later. Teddy Roosevelt was a hunter and a fisherman before he became president. Another famous naturalist, John Muir, I'm not exactly sure, but he ultimately became the most famous naturalist there's ever been. Charles Darwin, of course, was a naturalist, and he did most of his training in the field. And when you're in the field for on the woods and the water for a period of time, you start to ask questions, and questions such as, why do the salmon come earlier or later from one year to the next, but they're always in synchrony? Do they follow one smart fish? And the answer is they don't. Okay, but it's a question that daunted wildlife fishery biologists for many years. And in a previous book, Biological Time, I studied the question, and it came up with a measurable answer, and an answer that you could actually time all the events of the salmon, including when they spawn, to the day, at least the peak to the day. And so one could actually go to the river and go fishing and know, if salmon are present in that river, you could pick the right times and so on to catch, and days to be there when you catch a salmon. And Native Americans had this in their calendars. They had in their calendars for many animals and plants across North America. And so I took that concept of the Native American timing and I said, well, maybe it's deeper in time. Because Native Americans came across the Bering Strait region, or actually inhabited the Bering Strait 23,000 years ago. And so maybe if I went back to the caves in Europe, the Paleolithic caves from 20, 30,000 years ago, I might find these same animists, these same naturalists, patterns and rhythms in their art. And that's where we are now, in this time and place where we're looking through the minds of the Paleolithic artists from 34,000 years ago. And what we're seeing inside his mind, it's the same as ours.
Okay. All right. I think I get what you're saying now. So this parallels nicely with what I did, and a lot of people know what I did. But I went overseas. I was a spy, but I also kind of did spying from an anthropological point of view because the system, the military system, the U.S. system was to bring and deliver democracy and capacity. But the reality when I went on the ground is they have rule of law. We don't see it as it, but you don't just get to change the system for free. Like you have to find out how to get, the salmon are already going one direction and they start, they have a schedule and their schedule's full. They go here, they go there, they spawn, they go up the river. All those things are on a timetable. Same thing with Afghans, with Iraqis, with Americans. We all do things in a certain pattern that's discernible if you sit back and you shut up and you listen and you allow the weird to overtake you until weird becomes normal. That's sort of how I approach it. So I take a look and I look for what their normal is, what our normal is. I don't know if you know about liminal space, but I sort of enter different liminal realities and I try to start to go, okay, this is what these guys are saying and doing. Here's where we are. We're nowhere near each other. How do we nudge this reality towards a common reality? Does that make sense at all?
It actually makes a lot of sense. And here's an interesting point how the two overlap. In the Paleolithic caves, they're predominantly of animals. And then the ones that I work on, that I describe in the book for Ryan and many of the YouTube videos, there's some people as well. And in the case where you have these people, they actually overlap with the animals. And so a man overlaps with a dolphin and becomes a merman. Mm-hmm. A man overlaps with a horse and becomes a centaur. The man overlaps with a giraffe, the head of a giraffe, and some mythical animal we didn't reinvent. And so what happens is that in the Paleolithic mind, they, not as the animists, they just didn't see the clouds as being spirits and the mountains as gods and the animals as their brothers and sisters. They actually, their spirit in their spiritual world, they connected with them. They learned from them. They had gained wisdom from them. And in most of these images, they're actually female animals, and that the human characters overlap with. And so one could possibly have a matriarchal society, because we're at that time, we're definitely learning from the female characters. And so what we have this mix between the two, but back 34,000 years ago, but we still have it today. So if you think about superheroes, well, the latest one is Ant-Man, Batman, Spider-Man. We mix with the animals in our psyche to become one with them, and we gain strength from them in the same way that these characters did in the Paleolithic images. And so we would like to say, well, we're not animists anymore. We're thinking, man, we're people of science. But the fact is that when we project our psyche out there, we pick up the animals around us and we bring it back in us. We see the world through the eyes of animals. Someone's as smart as an owl. They're as fast as a horse, and a bull in a china shop, stubborn as a mule. We keep using these metaphors because we see the animals within ourselves.
Okay. So these characters, Aquaman, Ant-Man, Batman, all of these things, these combinations. Is this? And I know you kind of guess. Wait, let me back up. When we look at things like cave writing, I was trying to think like what that must be like, because these are the only things that we have left. Like the most of the statues from antiquity are gone. Most of the masterpieces either were destroyed in an earthquake or just disappeared. So the same thing must be true of paintings. But do you get a sense that when you look at cave, the engravings, the paintings, that they're much more, gosh, I don't know. Artists always push the bounds, right? And so you've got these early minds is pushing the bounds, what we would consider completely pedestrian in terms of what's crazy. I mean, putting together two animal figures to explain something, that seems to make sense because we don't know what these things are. Like that must be a mermaid. How does this thing survive in water? I see it breathing like I do. When people draw on these things, is there array of possibilities? Do you think it's limited because it's so early on, or is this just what we have to play with?
I believe that we haven't changed.
Okay.
I believe that this Paleolithic mind is still within us, that we still project our psyche out there, and that we see ourselves within the animals. So if you think, if you jumped off an airplane and you didn't know where you were, and you land in a bunch of pandas, where are you?
China.
You're in China, of course. Unless it's a zoo, you're in China. Okay.
Right.
And of course, China's national animal is the panda. The United States is the bald eagle, and Russia is the bear. Okay. Mm-hmm. And Spain is the bull. So we through our nationalities and our sports teams and our states and our high schools and everything that we do, we identify with the animals within us. We draw strength from those animals, and so the bull football team is going to look a lot better than, let's say, the Cardinal football team, right?
Right.
At least they'll have that presence, and so we haven't changed very much. So I have to correct you on something, because I didn't know this until recently, that
Sure.
So it's not a mermaid. So it's a man that overlaps with the dolphin. So it's a merman.
Okay.
And previous interviews I was calling the mermaid man. But anyway, going back in this gallery disc image, which is predominant one that I use, you have a man that's going on a journey. And the journey is from the Iberian Peninsula, which is now Spain. He travels across the Strait of Gibraltar. He goes to Africa and he returns back again. And on his journey, he encounters these animals. So there's animals that are unique to the Iberian Peninsula. There's animals that are unique to Africa, for example, a giraffe. And he encounters them and draws strength from them. And we can tell where he is on his journey because of the animals, because there were no giraffes in Europe anywhere in that time period. It was millions of years ago they might have been in Europe, but not in that time period 30,000 years ago. And there's animals that are in Europe. This is, for example, the Iberian lynx is not in Africa, and we have no record that it ever was in Africa. So we have animals that are on two sides of the water, where we find the seal, we have a crab, and we have the dolphin. And these animals are European and they're African. And as the character, this hero, goes on his journey, he leaves Europe and encountering those animals, and he draws strength from them, emotional strength. He learns about their interrelationships with their young, because they show it's a mother animal with its young. But he also learns where he is geographically, where by those animals. And so just the same way that if you jumped off an airplane, you landed in China, sort of pandas, you say, I'm in China. Well, he did the exact same thing 34,000 years ago. And that was how they tell, that's one way that they found their way in space, that they could navigate. It was they didn't have road signs.
Right.
They navigated by the animals that they encountered.
Okay, and probably the vegetation too. Like now I'm seeing ferns, so I'm in.
Well, absolutely. I'm sure by the vegetation, and of course the water bodies and so on. But you could have some sort of fern on both sides of the Strait of Gibraltar.
Sure.
But there's a giraffe on one side, and then there's a Iberian lynx on the other.
Yeah. And so if you guys are looking, his name is Bernie Taylor, and you can look up beforeorion.com, and there's a ton of videos and a lot of Bernie explaining a lot of these concepts. So if you're like me and you're struggling to understand it and trying to sort it out, you definitely can go to his website, and you guys should, and check it out. And he's real active on social media, so you can also grab his attention there. Okay.
So Joseph Campbell spoke about this.
Yes.
Joseph Campbell spoke about the hero's journey, and that's the hero's journey we find that Star Wars was modeled after. George Lucas was buddies with Joseph Campbell, and they worked together on finding these archetypal motifs, that these stories that are within us all and the characters that we can relate to. And of course, we can relate to, Batman, Spider-Man, and so on, because again, we have this animism within us. So anyway, Joseph Campbell comes up with the story of this hero's journey, and Joseph Campbell wrote that he didn't really know where it came from, but he maybe it could have been some cave in Siberia, because Native Americans have the same story. People around the world have the same fundamental myth. But he also said, maybe it's in these caves in Europe as well. And he looked in the caves, and he didn't find he didn't see the human characters that we can now see through these high resolution images. And we have information that Joseph Campbell didn't have. And Joseph Campbell and other people like the Swiss psychoanalyst Jung, most of their data was going back to the time of psychological data was back to the time of Gilgamesh, the great story of the hero, and which is about 4,500 years ago. And psychology works on the basis that Gilgamesh has the same archetypal themes, the metaphors, and that we have in story today. Therefore, nothing's changed in 4,500 years. But now we can actually look at this. We can say, well, nothing's actually changed in 34,000 years.
Yeah.
Because we have the same stories. And so that gap in time of 30,000 years just closed in on us. And we if you and I were going to high school, there was this concept of knuckle dragging cavemen who, and the women were, running around as slaves or something. But now we have this completely different vision of our past. We have artists that are more incredible than anybody we have in today's animation or in modern arts from the time in the recent past. We're talking Picasso. In fact, Picasso had come out of the Altamira cave in Spain, near to this gallery of discs, and he said, I couldn't have done this, and none of my friends could have done this. This is not a forgery. And so they had brought Picasso into test. In fact, it was a forgery. And he said, this is beyond anything that we can do. And what Picasso does, he takes characters from the Altamira cave. He uses them in his first Cubism art, Les Dames d'Avignon. He later uses them in Guerrero and many other of his most famous images. Picasso borrows characters from tens of thousands of years ago, not just the exact image, but he borrows the metaphors. And he takes them into the modern time. And that gives us what we believe today to be modern art. But you know something? It's not. But Picasso borrowed it from the Paleolithic past. And very important is the image that two images that he used for his first Les Dames d'Avignon in 1907 were from Altamira, is their horses. So he took these images of horses and he put them over the masks of two women, women of the street, these prostitutes in Spain. And so he transforms them into centaurs of sorts, right? He finds the animism within those female characters, and he projects that into his art. So Picasso hadn't left behind this animist past. He brought it from the past to our time today. And we still live with the idea that, Picasso invented modern art, but he didn't. He was brilliant, but he didn't invent modern art.
It's been invented for a while. Actually, I recall a couple of days ago, maybe a week or two ago, another finding where it basically doubled the time. I think, if the cave drawings we know about are 40,000 years old, this took it to like 70 or 80,000 years ago. It was in South Africa. I don't know if you saw the story, but more pigment found in rocks.
I did see that. Yeah, that was like in Saudi Arabia. Okay, that's different. That was that's actually in South Africa.
Yeah.
What that was is there was red ochre on like stripe marks on top of a piece of rock.
Right.
That cave had actually previously been shown to have the oldest markings on rock, which are very similar to those of the paint, the red ochre paint that you saw. So what they did was the markings on the rock were previously disputed, so maybe someone just doodled it. But now we find similar work of the red ochre so the guy didn't, unless they doodled the same thing, it didn't happen. So that was kind of important to find. But those images are of maybe some sort of tally mark or something. What we're talking about in the cave in Spain, in this El Castillo cave with Guerrero discus, we're talking about characters that we can look at them and we can identify not just the animals, but we can see the human characters and see their emotions. There's a woman who has long braided red hair, and she's obviously in distress. She has, her chin is down, and her you can see her cheeks are kind of not like an older woman's cheeks, but they're sagging, but they're just like she just doesn't look happy. And so these artists had the ability. They were highly empathetic people. They saw the beauty in the world around them. They saw the emotions. They felt what the people in their world felt. These were not knuckle dragging cavemen, and so the difference between the South African find and this one is that we're in an age of modernity that goes tens of thousands of years. But that was a good one to point out. Thank you.
The other thing I'm always wondering too is we feel like as humans, we sense patterns, mostly get those wrong, I would say. And then the other thing is we get a sense for self, right? Like this is like where enlightenment comes from. Like we're able to get out of self and see other perspectives, and it changes the self, and you're like, oh, I do play a part in this system. That has to go back as far back as people have thought about things. I mean, just by getting older and surviving, you realize I've mostly been an asshole most of my life. If I quit being so focused on me and I at least focused on being a better person for everybody else, I will have more enjoyment and they will have more enjoyment. And so we're all going to be in a better place. That archetype, that actually must be an archetype, and that must go back 10,000 years.
Of course it is, exactly. And so what you have become the wise man, the older man. And in this cave image at El Castillo, we find an older man speaking to the ear of a young boy. And the young boy's, his eyes are wide open and his lips are pursed and he's intently listening. And so, yes, the story of the teacher and the apprentice that we find through myths everywhere. And it could be older woman, the young girl. It doesn't matter. But we find that you are now the wise men, and you're on air, interacting with people like me and Brian and others, and you're absorbing our stuff, but you're also passing it on to the greater audience. So you are the podcast wise man at this moment.
Yes.
Which is pretty cool.
It is cool. One of the questions I ask a lot, especially on my technology podcast, Popping the Bubble, which everybody should check out, POPPINGTHEBUBBL.com, Popping the Bubble. But one of the things I always ask, like all these really smart technology people that are just rocketing us forward into the future, more data, more ability to crunch data, are we any wiser? And it gives all of them a pause because it's such a powerful question when you think, are we? And now I'm realizing that's a forward projected question. Like we have all this access to information, but are we any wiser than they were 40,000, 73,000 years ago?
Absolutely not. And I'm going to give you a good example. So you looked at the videos and you remember seeing some animals, you saw the elephant for sure and some others? Mm-hmm. Okay. And on that same panel, so you remember seeing a few, correct?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Okay, well, that of course is a big, we're going to tell you, here's the punchline that we didn't start off with. The Gallery of Discs was first found over 100 years ago in El Castillo Cave. And until my work, nobody saw anything but red discs.
Oh,
so this panel is about 10 meters across, maybe 80 or so red discs. Each red disc is about the size of the palm of your hand. So everybody was counting the red discs. There's scores of research that will say there's nothing there but red discs, blank, blank, blank. So why didn't they look beyond these red discs? Why didn't they see the forest of the trees? They were counting the red discs. Mm-hmm. And those red discs were drawn to them. And there was an interesting experiment done a few years ago by a fellow named Nicholas Tinbergen. And Tinbergen won a Nobel Prize for his book, The Study of Instinct. And in his work, he had a fish tank by the window. And every day a red delivery truck came by, the fish went into a defensive posture. And so they were reacting to the red. Now, Tinbergen reasoned that they couldn't think about reacting to the red because they don't have the cerebral hemispheres, the cognitive thinking, that the gray matter that we have. And so it was brainstem dominant, something deep inside of them. And so we react to red stop signs, red in McDonald's, DQ, and Burger King.
Sure.
And all this other red in our world because it's brainstem dominant. It's something within us. So the millions of people that saw these images, the same ones that you saw, whether they saw them in the media, whether they saw online, or they actually saw them face to face, they were drawn into counting those red discs. They were stimulated by the red, and they didn't see the elephant in the room. In fact, so this life-size elephant is in front of them, but the Paleolithic artist hid it behind the red discs.
Yeah.
Because we're drawn to the red disc. So back to your question have we learned anything in 34,000 years?
Yeah. Have we? I mean, we feel like, again, in our time, we feel like, our time is the worst, our time is the best. But, you look at, and Romans had surgery, like there's all these parallels where even in terms of science, yeah, it's a little different. But is it really? When you consider, if you had 1% change per year, surgery would be wildly better. And it's largely the same process. I mean, it's safer and everything else. But, if Romans at zero, year zero, if they were operating and doing brain surgery, like are we appreciably any better? Yeah, we have antibiotics, but heck, how about that ancient machina antica, that thing they just keep trying to figure out what the heck and how did they build that thing? And then I'm always struck by. We look at music a lot on this show, and one of the things is as new forms come out, there's a lot of experimentation and frankly getting it wrong until the art form reaches its zenith and evolves and becomes something else. I mean, classical music is still made today, but I think we can all agree the greatest classical music ever was made 150, 200 years ago during Mozart and Wagner and all those guys. So the same must be true for cave art in terms of the artistic expression, where like the first guy's like, I want to draw me a giraffe. And he's like, I can't figure out what he doesn't necessarily have yellow, so he can't do that. And he's trying to describe something, or even like looking at the stars and mapping out the zodiac, right? Like, that's Orion. Like, which stars there's no light pollution, so you can see everything. There's a bazillion stars in the sky. You're trying to say, those 8, don't you see those? And trying to make the pattern. You're like, let me show you on the wall over here. And then all of a sudden you paint out Orion, and it becomes a hunter. Am I making too much of a leap with that?
No, you're not at all. And so I talked about these characters on the cave wall and Elkus in the Gallery of Discs. All those characters are actually constellations.
Okay.
And so that's actually where we get the constellations from. The Greeks under the ancients had gone to these caves, and they actually took the whole portfolio. Okay?
Yeah.
And so I'd mentioned the merman before. That's Aquarius. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the centaur is Sagittarius.
Mm-hmm. Okay? Of course. Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
This hero on his journey that's depicted in the Gallery of Discs is the story of Hercules, the myth of Hercules. And he goes all the same places that Hercules goes on his final labors. And so constellations, that's really important. So I had said that the animals on the ground are where he saw them on his journey. Well, he actually saw them in the night sky as well. Okay. And so Pellethic Man had projected their vision of what those animals were into the night sky. And so the horse is an animal that was in Europe and wasn't in West North Africa. And so he not only he was following the animals on the land, but he was also following them in the night sky. It was his first map. And so I believe that, so this is 34,000 years ago. We have the entire record that the ancient Greeks had. The ancient Greeks didn't have many more. And maybe they had something that was much further north, but most of the constellations of the ancient Greeks are in this particular.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business, or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
Much further north, but most of the constellations of the ancient Greeks are in this particular cave panel, 10 meters across. And but that wasn't the first constellations. That wasn't the first time we had constellations, because people don't start. You don't put the constellations onto the cave wall, just as you don't write a book. You tell the story before you write the book.
Right.
You tell the story around the campfire for thousands of years before it ends up into a movie. And so the first constellations are, going back to what you had mentioned, was probably Orion. Because around the world we have Orion. Mm-hmm. We also have Sirius as a dog, even though there's nothing that says Sirius looks like a dog. But around the world we have Sirius as a dog. We have Ursa Major as a legged animal, and often as a bear. And when it's a bear, it's a she-bear. Mm-hmm. And so that's an important one as well. And the other one are the Pleiades and the stars in Taurus. And the versions around the world, they're a group of people, typically women, and Orion is chasing them. So there was a point in time, even deeper than this cave, that we had a common mythology, that we were from the same place and we saw the same stars. And we carry those around the world in Ursa Major, Orion, Pleiades, and Sirius as a dog. And then later on, 34,000 years ago, which is still like a really long time ago, in historical terms, it's unfathomable in historical terms, because we don't have any history beyond, Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years ago. We don't really have anything beyond that in history. So we actually have a historical event in this image. And so, but anyway, you were right on with Orion, that they could see him in the night sky. And not only they could see him in the night sky, but they could watch him on his journey. So as Orion is low on the horizon, he approaches the mountain, he's climbing it. And when passes through the mountain. He's entered the mountain. He's died. And when he comes out of the mountain, he's reborn, which is fundamentally the same story of Jesus. Jesus, he dies. They put him in the cave, and he comes out a few days later. And so these myths are embedded throughout our religions. We can't escape from them. And they go back to these great heroes. The hero on his journey that we see in the night sky wherever we are around the world.
Yeah, and I guess you could take this back to the ancient Greeks, and before Jesus, there was Dionysus. He did the same thing: water to wine,
yes.
Fed everybody, fish and loaves. It's the same dude. So, and that's not to disparage anybody who's Christian or anything at all, but we have these stories that somehow have a latency to them from epoch to epoch, because you're not even talking generations here. You're talking large, 400-year ages where this story it morphs and evolves, but it travels and it gets there on its own, and it does make you wonder, how does Sirius become a dog in all these different places? Because Orion looks like a man. A man, right? It's got a waist, but Sirius doesn't look like anything. It's just one really bright star with a bunch of stars around it. Like, how do you make a pattern, and why that pattern over one of the other ones?
It's because we came from the same place. The myth came from the same place and traveled around the world. That's why. And so I actually, in these Paleolithic images, I have dogs. And they're in the place of Sirius. And there's one dog, it has a star on its flank that is astronomically perfectly from where Sirius would be. And so it's really interesting that we come from that same place, and we tell the same. The hero may change from a man to a woman. So sure. Moana, in the Disney Hawaiian version, is female. And most of the Disney movies now have female heroes, which is cool. And even the new James Bonds, we have heroines, right? The hero still goes on the journey. Alice goes down the hole. Wizard of Oz.
Dorothy goes on the journey. Frodo goes on the journey to Mordor. We carry these stories around the world. The Chinese have a story called Journey to the West, where a monk takes fundamentally the same journey as Frodo. But right. he picks up characters along the way, and he gets the sacred scrolls, and then he comes back home to share them with the kings. So we have the same mythology around the world, and that's what Jung was tied to. Jung. That's what Joseph Campbell was tied to. Joseph Campbell was saying that everybody around the world is fundamentally saying this story has the same path of travel that they go through. Therefore, there must be either something out conscious that carries this, or we all came from the same place. And Joseph Campbell actually drew a lot of his work from the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung. And Joseph Campbell had wrote The Portable Jung. And Jung had a dream. This is a really important dream because it ties together how we see the world today in myth. Jung had a dream that he walks down the hallway in an old house, and the paint's coming off. As he continues down, he sees the paint still coming off, but it's plaster from like ancient Greece or Rome. And so he says, "I'm going to a different time." Continuing down the hallway, he has a rock, like a cave rock, and soil on the sides for the walls, and he recognizes that he has now traveled back in time to the Paleolithic caves. And he says, it emerges from the stream and says the Paleolithic mind is still our own. We're telling the same stories. So he goes on this journey early in his life to gathering all the mythology that he can from around the world. And he starts saying, this is fundamentally the same story. And Joseph Campbell later borrowed that concept and developed into a more systemized structure from what we know today as the hero's journey, and which is taught in high schools across North America. Sure.
It's part of us.
Yeah,
it's our own myth.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we have to ask the question, when we see all these things, is there the one thing that we have learned, I think, is that genetics has a much greater role on who we are than we have ever really understood. Just the mix of the different genes together. And it's not because you're 100% like your mom or your dad, or you may not even be like a good amalgamation of the two. Maybe there's just a weird mix, but we're learning a lot more about that. So are we talking about a genetic pattern where there's just some
Okay, I prophesize this. I'm going to tell you right now.
Okay.
I'm not a prophet, but I prophesize. You know how I could prophesize that question? Because every podcast, every presentation I've given, they've asked me the same question.
Yeah.
And I've given, astronomers and physicists and anthropologists and paranormal psychics. And by the way, psychics shouldn't be asking that question. They should know the answer.
They should know the answer, right?
But everybody asked me the exact same question. And it's about halfway through the, 25, 30 minutes of the interview. Because they get to this, it's been juggling around their head. They read some stuff that I did before. They watched the YouTubes, and they're like, how does this really work?
It's hard to keep up with the thing. I'll be honest. Like I want to make sure I'm asking good questions, but you're right. Like
you just asked the big one. You asked the question every listener by this point is asking as well. And I'm going to give you the answer as I see it. Okay. And we really don't have an answer. There's really no knowing, but we can actually kind of get to the bottom of it of sorts. And I'm going to give you the perspective of something I experienced in my life. Okay. I live in Portland, Oregon, near the Oregon Zoo. Mm-hmm. Fabulous zoo if you're into zoos. If you don't like zoos and you think animals should only be in Africa, don't go.
Okay.
So in this zoo, we have a lion area. And there's a male lion who is always at the top of the heap. The female is in the center, and there's a young male at the bottom. And in Africa, that all makes sense because the lion at the top protects the pride. And if another lion comes by that challenges him and takes him over, he will then kill the youngest lions, the cubs. Okay. So he's the Don, right?
Right.
He's the Don of the mafia family. There's Don Corleone, there's Don Gambino, there's Don Trump. He's the Don. Okay. So we have this lion at the top of the heap. Well, that all makes sense in Africa.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense in the Oregon Zoo because these animals are fed. Mm-hmm. So why do they keep that same position and have those same dynamics? Well, for him to have become the head, the Don at the top, he had to have some chutzpah, right? Mm-hmm. He had to have some testosterone flowing. He had to be able to say, the women of the pack and the pride, just keep it down. I'm here at the top. But he also can't let the young lion at the bottom because that's threatening his power. Okay, so maybe I'm projecting of human psyche into these animals, and maybe this is in the Lion King as well. But really, these animals, they're acting like humans in a way, and they're acting in such a way that it's in them. So they carry on. If a lion doesn't have it, the male lion doesn't have this testosterone, he can't be sitting at the top of the pack. Right. Because the women are going to kick him off. And so the lions that survive, the lions that go on, are the ones that have that, become the leaders, are the ones with the heavy testosterone, which again, of course, then allows them to impregnate the females and carry on the line and so forth. And so within animal behavior, we have human behavior. The only difference between us and those lions in that tank is we can tell the story, just as I just expressed it to you. It's naturally within the lions. And the same that we pass on the personality characteristics of the lions, in the same way that you pass on blue eyes or blonde hair or red hair or short, tall, or even we have personality characteristics that we take from our parents. And so they're passed in the same way. Is that genetics? I don't know. Because we don't actually have, a specific genetic trait for, being the Lion King. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you actually have to prove yourself to be the Lion King. You just don't just get there.
Right.
And so we carry on these archetypal characters, the old and the young, the protective females and the protective male, the Don. We carry them on in our own psyche, whether or not they're taught to us. So when these archetypes are countered, the stories are evoked. So there's a bunch of other, of course, it's a big zoo. There's a bunch of other animals. There's elephants and there's giraffes and there's hippos. And if they could chime in to what I just said and, give their own kibitzen, we'd have the Lion King, and that would be the movie.
Right.
So the animals have these behaviors within them in the same way that we still react to the red as the fish in Tinbergen's tank. They're deep within our brains. Are they carried from one person to another DNA? I would probably say yes, as opposed to downloaded from the cloud or something. And the reason is that we have personality characteristics that come to us from both our parents. And these are based on personality characteristics. So then so we can just, I'm going to say that we have these archetypal characters. We have these because of its basic animal behavior. The only difference is that we tell the story. As far as we know, they can't tell the story.
Right.
Okay. Now, so why do we tell this? How can we tell the story, and why do we tell the story? And does that make any difference? Why do we have these myths? Well, somewhere along the line, we developed the ability to have speech. And we had speech, we could have more elaborate stories. Whereas chimpanzees act out stuff. They act out behaviors that each one can recognize. Chimpanzees in the wild probably have about 40 hand body gestures. And so, we actually have that ability to speak and tell the story. And by us having the ability to speak, we can step above the chimpanzees, because I can tell you a story wherever you are right now that someone in Europe would also understand, and someone in China would understand, because they have that same mythological structure in their storytelling. We have common beliefs. Whereas a chimpanzee in Africa really doesn't have much beliefs, but very different from the ones in the Oregon Zoo here, from the perspective of they look at each other. Well, we're both chimps, but we don't share the same God, or we don't share the absence of a God, sure. Or whatever the belief is. So as we go around the world, we have the ability to communicate with each other, because I believe that you will treat me honorably on this podcast. And you believe that I'm not going to say it's a wild, nutty thing that's going to embarrass you, even though you could edit it out afterwards.
Yeah.
So we have that belief between the two of us. We have a myth between us that we will treat each other honorably. In the United States, we have democracy. Well, the Koch brothers and Bernie Sanders have a completely different view of democracy, but they come together because they ultimately believe that, given the myth of democracy, if we all gather around it, we're not going to perpetually be in a civil war. And so around the world, we have these same concepts. Christian countries tend to get along with each other better than Muslim countries. But then when the Muslim myth was separated between the Sunnis and the Shiites, then they became at war with each other. Okay. And so these myths are important, and these myths allowed us to, we weren't just, tribes roaming about. We were tribes that met other tribes that we had no encounter with before, and we could share the same myth. We could point to the night sky and Orion, and we could point to Ursa Major and say, he's hunting Ursa Major. And we could point to our dog and Sirius say, that's the dog. So we have the ability to share these myths, and the storyboard is in the night sky above us. By us being able to share these myths, we could communicate, we could work together, and we could constantly not be at war with each other, which chimps do, by the way.
Yeah.
If chimps had a common myth, they wouldn't be killing each other off. That's what Jane Goodall found in her work. So myths are important. Myths are what keep us together. The UN is a complete myth that all these people believe the same thing for that, hours that they're there. Well, they don't. But the myth is that if we all come together and we all talk, we're going to have less wars. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's a myth. And that's how it works.
Yeah, I pick up what you're putting down. I hear you with that. So we're talking about the wiring of our basic ideal of just trying to get a little better, maybe even. And that has to go all the way back to the very, very root, because that's why we're all standing here. The human body has survived a lot of attacks, smallpox. That's why all of us who survived that, we got through, at least in Europe, because our family was the families that survived the plague, all these things. And there's a certain wiring that goes along as we get better at doing things, because the guys that couldn't make these decisions, I can see that. And I also understand your point about chimps versus us and our ability to create context, where even if we do disagree, we might be able to sort out some kind of middle ground. Like, hey, I need a whiteboard and I can explain this better. A chimp doesn't, at least as far as I know, doesn't have the ability to say, hang on, slow down. This is more like Devil in a blue dress or Carmen in a red dress. And you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, you can create context because we're able to, because we have the ability to communicate with language. And that's interesting. Okay.
If you offered a chimp one banana they have a choice of one banana now or 1,000 bananas if they wait tomorrow for an answer, which one do you think a chimp's going to choose? Mm-hmm. The one banana.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so the chimps don't see the future like we see this future. That doesn't mean chimps aren't smart.
Right.
Chimps are highly intelligent, but they don't have the future that we do. They don't have that story, that myth, the myth of the promise that they're going to get 1,000 bananas tomorrow, because they say, no, I got this banana, I'm good. I can't even understand this concept of having 1,000 bananas tomorrow if I trade off for this one.
Yeah. Well, and really, what's a chimp going to do with 1,000 damn bananas? They're just going to spoil. And it's like, no.
Well, they don't even think that way. Chimps don't think that. They never even get that far because they can't. They don't have the myth of there being a future and that there's something to work towards. Chimps are tribes of chimps go at war with each other, but within their own tribe, chimps generally get along. You have a hierarchical character, a male character, just like the lion. He keeps everybody under wraps, and then the females take care of the young. They quabble with each other, but we have these archetypal characters. They're in all animals, and they're in us. And when the archetype is encountered, story is evoked. Okay, so how does one use this knowledge on a day-to-day basis? I mean, if we know that archetypes exist, and Jordan Harbinger talks about archetypes all the time. He's great at this stuff. But what is someone who I don't know, works in sales, software sales, or someone who does accounting? How do they use this knowledge of archetypes? That's a good question. Yeah, it's actually an important question, and you do use it right now. If you ever taken a Myers-Briggs test. Use it. So the introvert, the extrovert, the sensor, the feeler, the thinker, the feeler. We use these archetypes in our interpersonal relationships. In our if you go to some sort of marital counseling, you're going to start with a Myers-Briggs test, okay, or something like that.
Right.
The salesman better be your extrovert, I'm going to tell you, and your accountant is typically going to be your introvert. And so through these archetypal characters, actually these archetypal characters, the thinker, the feeler, and so on, they actually came from Jung. Carl Jung developed that system. It then became he developed all the types. It then became systemized by Myers-Briggs, who made the tests that we all see today. So we have that in us today. But here's the most important part. Is that, and so how do we deal with it in a sense?
Yeah.
Well, we have to recognize that nothing's going to change. We will always have Don Corleone. We will always have Don Gambino. We always have Don Trump. These archetypal characters will always exist, and so we just have to sort of grin and bear it. Sometimes and there'll always be the hero that fights against them, that fights against the villain, the dragon, the Darth Vader, whoever that person is. So we're playing roles that have been played before for at least tens of thousands, at least to 34,000 years ago, if not hundreds of thousands of years before that. Stories that we can't escape. And the best thing is sort of like if you recognize the Don Corleone, you have to recognize that he's protecting his own.
Yeah, totally.
He is the protector and the bully at the same time.
Yeah.
It's really what it is. Of course, during the election, instead of Hillary, what can you say good about, on Trump? And she said, well, he's a good family man. And the truth is, he is a really good. It's a big family, but he's a good family man. So he is both the bully and the protector at the same time. The same way as the lion in the zoo. So we have to realize that there's a flip side to everything, and that we can't escape who we are. I believe that there'll be some distant descendant of both of ours that are interviewed just like us today. Through format. And the same questions will be asked and the same answers will be given. And I believe that those same questions and those same answers were given by the ancient Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and so forth. And then they were asked 34,000 years ago in these Pelita caves when the apprentice came in and he came to the shamanic teacher and he said, what do I do? What's my role here? And the teacher just look at the board, look at the storyboard. Tell me what you see in these images about yourself, and to prepare for your own hero's journey that you're going to take to go to Africa. Because I believe that the shamanic apprentice actually had to take this journey and come back again. And this was wasn't just a storyboard; it was his map in life that he would take. So I believe that these stories and this approach has been with us for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years ago. And I believe that in hundreds of thousands of years in the future, if we're all still here, some distant descendant of ours will be telling us, we'll be having this same conversation.
So you're saying that the guy in that cave was like the world's first life coach?
oh goodness, he's the first. He is the first depicted life coach for sure.
Yeah, that's great.
So this is what's really cool.
Yeah.
Is that so? Not only does the man transform into a dolphin and a horse and all these sort of things, but the artist made this so there was multiple perspectives, so that the man himself shape shifts from one type of man to another. In a sense, he takes a mask on and off. And so this artist is telling us that there can be multiple perspectives in life.
Right.
There's no knowing. There's no certainty. There's, you read the newspaper, scientists discovered today, now we know. Well, that's bogus.
Yeah.
Because this artist shows us that millions of people had seen this. And they couldn't get past the red disc. And even if they had got past the red disc, would they really have seen these multiple perspectives of the artist's vision? Are we is there some, utopian society ahead of us? I would say we're not going to get much past the lion tank.
Well, I don't know if there will be some utopian place, but I do know that Thomas More and Erasmus talked about this at length and wrote about it. And they played with the word utopia and utopia because you really can't tell which way it was being said. And they did that on purpose because utopia is a place that we can understand. It's perfect and everybody has what they need and all those kind of things. Utopia, which is spelled and almost pronounced exactly the same, is a fictional place. It's no place. And, you're sort of juxtapositioning this whole thing, and it goes all the way back to, Thomas More and Erasmus and all the way back to the Greeks and whoever, some Asian dude up on a mountain. It does go back to these things. We do have these archetypal issues, and we are going to, if you get soft and you allow yourself to be one of the outer ring lions, there is going to be a lion in the middle of the ring, and it's going to marshal things, and it's going to improve its position for its family, for its pride, and it's going to do everything it can to create survival. And if that means coalescing power, if that means murdering 10,000 people, guess what's going to happen?
Yep.
Like those things continue to happen. We're always looking for the next Hitler, and that's in some ways smart, but in other ways it's a little bit silly because then everything's Hitler, and the next thing you know, the person who's actually Hitler has come up from behind you because they've slowly gathered power, and now it's too late. So I dig it. I dig the whole idea of it, and the exchange of power. Like, I'll give you a great example. We were talking to these guys that do a lot of stuff on the blockchain, and they were talking about how they were going to try to end hunger and homelessness by using cryptographic currency. And I'm like, okay, but that's already being worked on. What are you guys doing differently? It's like, well, our system's better. And I'm like, all right, I mean, it's a hard problem to solve. People that need help, but aren't capable of even receiving help. Like, how do you, because the idea is to give them money with no strings. But if the person is not even capable of running their life, which I'm making a judgmental thing, but a person who physically and mentally cannot run a life, you can't just give them money without dealing with some real ethical problems. So here we have this problem where not everybody will have everything. We've proven that now, right? Like that for thousands of years, we've never been able to go, here's how everybody gets what they need and remains happy. And they don't just, say, forget that, I don't have enough, and do something else. Am I getting what you're saying, basically, that these problems that the Greeks had, that the Romans had, that the, go back as far as you want, the Babylonians had, that these big social problems are likely to remain?
Yeah, these are eternal questions without real solutions. There will always be conflict. There will always be people who can't take care of themselves. But in an economic sense, or in a physical sense, for sure. And in this image, what we find is we have this older man speaking into the ear of the apprentice.
Yes. And
so the older man is the wise man. So maybe he can't hunt as he did in the past. Maybe he can't, haul in a salmon. Maybe he can't yell on a yell from the, across to tell the story. But he still has value, just as you and I, as we're not older, but we're not 22 either.
Right.
That we have no value to any national sports team, but we're now telling our story, and that becomes we're the leaders, the managers, the thought leaders, all this these type of things. Yeah. We have become the wise men, and of course, all the people that come on your show as well, and we're sharing that knowledge that we've gained. And tonight we're on this program, we're sharing knowledge that goes back for tens of thousands of years, which is it's mind bending as a concept that we're channeling the Paleolithic mind that's still our own, and finding those stories deep within ourselves to share. And we're telling them through lions and chimpanzee and national politics and DNA, and it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it is phenomenal. And it's funny. So today's show that went up, we had Roger Clinton, Bill's brother, on the show. And I love Roger Clinton. He's such a great guy. And I said, off mic, 'cause I don't want to put him on the spot, but he said I could quote him, so it's all right to do so. But I said, what do you think, man? What about all this Donald Trump stuff? And he said, listen, this'll all pass. Everything's temporary. All these things that everybody's all fired up about, it's not as bad as we want it to be. And that ability for a Clinton to say that, just slow down. We've seen this before. We've seen crazy before. We'll see crazy again. And we're talking just 200 years here of history, with our history, or 200 and a quarter if you want to be fancy. But this is stuff we've seen before. When people say this was the most corrupt presidency ever, okay, let's talk intelligently about 44 other presidencies. Can you do it? No? Well, then what the hell are you doing? It's just hyperbole. Let's calm down a little bit, and let's spend some time reflecting and looking for that wisdom that you're talking about on the wall.
Absolutely. Yeah, the lion at the tank at the Oregon Zoo will be replaced. That lion at the top of the pack. And he will be, there will be another lion.
Yeah.
And maybe that young lion at the bottom. And he'll be the Don.
Yeah.
And he'll be the bully and the protector at the same time.
And the pride will complain and hem and haw about who's in the middle until it gets sorted out, So it is just the same thing.
It's the same story.
Yeah. The other funny thing, the Portland Zoo also has great concerts. There's a great concert series that plays in there every summer. They have bands.
Absolutely. We saw just a few weeks ago.
Pink Martini.
Pink Martini. Were you there?
No, but we almost bought plane tickets. I swear to God, we almost came up specifically for Pink Martini because they're such a great band. And my girl and I were dying to go up there. We have friends up there. We're dying to go up there and see a show in that venue because what a neat place to see a show.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, we were there. That was like a month ago. Well, Pink Martini, this is of course not a big plug show for Pink Martini, Portland band, but they also played the Schnitzer in the wintertime. We saw them at the Schnitzer. We saw them for New Year's Eve for like the midnight show or something. Lots of fun.
Now we're getting somewhere. Talking about Pink Martini. Yes.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, well, definitely. When you do head this way to see Pink Martini, touch base with us and we'll meet up. It's
absolutely. Yeah. I have built up a lot of reasons to go up to Portland. Of course, my girlfriend and her super dear friends, but also Rob Nyer, the author. He's been on the show a bunch of times. You've been on the show once. You'll be on again already. I can tell you that. And then also as a musician up there, Logan Lynn, who's sort of a friend of the show. So we've got a lot of reasons to come up there, and I'm always wanting to run around and talk to folks. So yeah, for sure. Looking forward to coming up and hanging. And anytime you're in Southern California, please stop in.
Absolutely.
Hey, everybody, we're talking to Bernie Taylor, and just a great ride, man. And I can't wait to put you up right next to my buddy Gaylord DeWald, because we also talk about a lot of these things. So it'll be neat to continue the conversation because you're pushing me in a new direction, and I like to be willing to learn and be uncomfortable, and you definitely put me there, and in a great way. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Pia. I'd love to be on the show again, and we'll have another session.